Everyone, it's Jan's birthday today. What do you want to show him what I got you?
Yeah, sure.
I think it's pretty cool.
I think it's pretty cool.
And the card as well. Look at that. So cute.
She got me a Blur box set, you guys.
Look inside. It's got all the studio albums and little rarities here and there. So everyone, wish Jan happy birthday. 19
Thanks,
years
guys.
young.
19 years young. I'm sorry I don't look very presentable, but
Great shirt.
thank you.
Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of Prog Mondays. I'm going to be doing another beginner's guide today, and hopefully this one will be a bit more fluent than my King Crimson one, because I got a lot of people saying stuff like I got things wrong and all that kind of stuff, but this time I definitely will not be getting things wrong because I know this band very well. And if you haven't read the title already, we're going to be talking about the 70s prog supergroup Emerson, Lake and Palmer. I've got a lot of ELP stuff behind me and on this wall and everywhere. I'm a huge ELP fan. They were probably one of the first prog bands that I properly got into, other than Genesis and Yes, but they were the one that I kind of fell in love with the most out of those kind of bigger prog bands. So I'll give you a little brief history of the group, how they came to form, and then I'll talk about the albums and where one should start when listening to this group, because they've got not a long discography, but each album is very different than the last, so, and some are more accessible than others. ELP, Emerson, Lake and Palmer, 3 people. One of the best trios in music, in my opinion, is formed of those 3 people: Keith Emerson, Greg Lake, and Carl Palmer. So how did they form this group? So those 3 were in groups prior to forming their supergroup, and they were all in pretty successful acts. I mean, Keith Emerson was part of The Nice, Greg Lake was in King Crimson, and Carl Palmer was part of Atomic Rooster and also The Crazy World of Arthur Brown. All of those names were big in the kind of late 60s and stuff like that. So I think after that they just kind of had a chat, you know, and just kind of got together and started making music. They released their first album, their self-titled debut, which I think is one of the best debut albums in music history, the Emerson, Lake and Palmer self-titled, and this has got the very well-known song Lucky Man on it, but it's also got some other great stuff on it, like Take a Pebble, The Barbarian, The 3 Fates, which is my personal favourite from this album. Yeah, it's got a lot of great songs on it. So that was the first album they released as ELP. And then secondly, they released this, so that was in 1970. Then they released Tarkus, which was 1971, and I actually read somewhere that during I think it was either the making of this album or the first one, there was a point where they were going to split off because there were so many kind of disagreements within the band. So luckily they stayed together, but there were a lot of disagreements within the group while making this album, so I don't know. I'm not sure how true that is, but I'm pretty sure it is. I wouldn't be surprised, you know, musicians argue all the time. But then Tarkus was released, you know, probably my favourite of the ELP stuff, the first album I ever listened to by them. Then did a live rendition of Pictures at an Exhibition, which is a classical piece which they adapted into a more modern, neoclassical type thing. This sounds amazing, and I've not listened to it in a very long time. I really should. A lot of people highly rate this. It's the one that I've listened to once, but I kind of skip occasionally when I'm listening to the ELP discography. I'll usually go from listening to Tarkus to Trilogy and onwards, which I'll talk about in a minute, because this is a live album. This isn't actually a studio album, but it is very beautifully put together. So if you like your classical music and you want to hear a more modern rendition of a classic piece, then this is one to check out. The keyboards sound great on this, by the way. All 3 of them, I believe, are classically trained, so it really does help, especially Keith Emerson. I mean, I think that he's the most classic, like, because you have keyboard players who are more focused in the jazzy roots, but then you have keyboard players who are more practiced in the classical roots of music, and I think I'm a fan of both, but I'm more leaning towards the classical bit because that's how I learnt to play piano. But I do love jazz influenced keyboard players. But then 1972 Trilogy. This is my second favourite. I mean, it's nearly becoming my favourite. I listen to this one so often. This has From the Beginning on it, if you were familiar with that track. It's a very well known track. Fantastic record. Just I think the title track is one of the most beautiful pieces of music I've ever heard in my life. I recommend it very highly. That and The Endless Enigma, which starts the album, and then there's like it's like a long thing. I really love it. And we have Brain Salad Surgery. I love the cover for this, the way that it was put together. I've got the poster up there, that one at the top there. But it opens out like so, and that looks very good. And this actually was designed by H.R. Giger, who actually did the art for Alien, or the design, the film Alien. Great film, by the way. And I think he designed an album cover for Debbie Harry, who was of Blondie. So he did this one. This is in 1973. This is very, very good. There's like a whole backstory about this album cover. There were parts that were a bit too inappropriate, and the band didn't like that it was a bit too inappropriate. And because H.R. Giger, or Giger, however you pronounce his name, was known for doing like very erotic artwork, very kind of sexual in a way, which is very kind of explicit, I guess. So there was an original design that was a bit more inappropriate than this one, but they changed it a little bit. So, but this is a fantastic album as well. It's got Carnival 9, which is the big piece in the end of the album, and the live rendition of it from the Welcome Back My Friends to the Show That Never Ends live album is fantastic. I think it's one of my favourite bits from that live album. It sounds amazing, and they went a semitone down, I think, when they were playing it live, which almost I prefer a little bit. I love the original, but that is fantastic. And that live album, which I'll get onto in a bit, is probably one of my favourite live albums of all time. I don't listen to live albums very often because I find that the sound can sometimes be a bit crappy depending on how well the sound was mixed after the show. But this album here, the Welcome Back My Friends to the Show That Never Ends, is fantastically done. A lot of people have mixed feelings on live albums. I sometimes have mixed feelings on live albums. A lot of people will think that Yes song sounds a bit dodgy. A lot of people think this sounds a bit dodgy. But I think that it sounds fantastic, especially the Carnival 9 version here. Also, big fan of the Take a Pebble version on here. The piano improvisations and all that stuff. Just a great, great live album. This is a very long live album. I think it could be a double album, but please don't quote me to that, because someone got annoyed at me because apparently I should know my albums when I thought something was a double album and it wasn't. So many apologies. But this is a fantastic, and the Tarkus version on this is very, very good. So that was 1974, and they took a couple of years, more like three years, to kind of not release any music. I think they might have just been touring throughout that time. But after those 3 years of not doing anything in the studio, they released Works Volume 1. People have very mixed opinions about this Works saga, not just Works Volume 1, but also Works Volume 2. This is a double album as well, and it's formatted at each band member created a piece for the album, and or created pieces for the album. So side 1 was the piano concerto, the Keith Emerson composed piece, which is absolutely fantastic, by the way. I know a lot of people don't like this album very much, but that was a fantastic classical piece. So that is not prog anymore. I think it's a proper classical music piece, like neoclassical. And then you have side 2, which is the Greg Lake stuff, more the melancholy, typical Greg Lake stuff, which I do love. This, like, C'est la vie is my favourite on this album. It's one of my favourite songs of all time. And then side 3, which is the Carl Palmer section, and Tank is fantastic as well. And then side 4 is all of them coming together to do Fanfare for the Common Man and also Pirates, which is, I think, quite underrated. So after that, they also released the second up-and-coming thing from Works Volume 1, which is Works Volume 2. Not as big of a fan of this one. I very much love Works Volume 1, and I think that's very hard to follow up on. And this album, it's got its moments, it's got parts where I'm like, okay, I quite like this, but I don't really like this album as much as the early stuff. I mean, it's got the Christmas song on it. I love that song. Singing it all the time at Christmas. Didn't even realise it was a Greg Lake song. I've known that song for years. It's got Tiger in the Spotlight, which is a great song. I remember the first time I listened to this album, that song really pulled me in. I do like So Far to Fall as well. Lyrics are quite explicit, but I do very much enjoy them. So that is the essential ELP period for me. After that, they made Love Beach, which I do have a copy of here, which I'm not going to really talk about in this video because I would avoid this one at all costs, and unless you like very sappy, cheesy music. Apart from the side 2 Memoirs of an Officer and a Gentleman, which is fantastic, but that's just side 2. Side 1 is more like basically pop music and very kind of too sweet for my taste. So that is their 70s stuff. Now, they didn't stay as Emerson, Lake and Palmer into the 80s. I think they split off after Love Beach, rightfully so, I guess. I mean, they were touring like mad. I think they went into debt at some point because they spent so much money on this works tour with the orchestra and everything. So they just kind of all split off, and Greg Lake went solo. Carl Palmer went on to join Asia, which is another supergroup that had a lot of big hits in the 80s. And I think Keith Emerson also went off and did solo stuff. He did a lot of film scores as well, so that's very good. And then they sort of reunited but didn't. So Keith Emerson and Greg Lake got back together and pulled in Cozy Powell, who's a fantastic drummer, and made this album, the self-titled Emerson, Lake and Powell record. It's alright. It's a decent album. It's got Touch and Go, which is a fantastic song. Everything else is like okay. There are points where I'm like, okay, this is good, but it's nothing in comparison to ELP, Emerson, Lake and Palmer. But it's a decent album. It's a good fun one, and it's got some good songs on it. Nothing, as I said, in the same league as things like Trilogy or Tarkus. So then, as like a lot of 90s, as the 90s roll around, there's a lot of older 70s prog bands did. They all reunited again and became Emerson, Lake and Palmer again and released 2 albums in the 90s, Black Moon and In the Hot Seat. I only own Black Moon, but I do not own In the Hot Seat because I didn't like that album very much. But they reunited, but they did do a fantastic live album, which I've got up here, in 1997, which is the Live in Switzerland, and this is such a great live album. The version of Touch and Go on here is very good. I'm a big fan of that. So after that, I think they just kind of never reunited again. They probably reunited for some shows, but they never did anything studio after that. So that is basically the history of the group and the albums. So where would I start with this band? Because if I was giving someone a pile of ELP albums, where would I start? So I would probably start with the first album, because it's gives you a good idea. Like I said in the King Crimson video with In the Court of the Crimson King, it's a great album to get a feel of the band. So you have the Three Fates, which is the Keith Emerson piece, which is fantastic. It's just an instrumental piano / keyboard piece. And you've got Lucky Man, which is the kind of typical Greg Lake kind of song. Actually, he wrote that song when he was 12, I think it was. That's incredible. And, you know, it's got a lot of fantastic stuff on this. So this is the one to start with. It's got all different types of stuff that someone can enjoy on it, just like in The Court of the Crimson King. It's very varied. It's got the jammy bits of things like Take a Pebble and obviously the Three Fates, and then it's got Lucky Man, the ballad song, and obviously Knife Edge as well, which is the more rocky song with a bit of a classical influence to it. So that is the one where I'd start, because that's very accessible in comparison to the rest. Then I would probably go with Trilogy, because even though the songs are a bit longer, it's not too challenging. It's got the actual title track Trilogy, which is amazing from the beginning as well. Again, quite a varied album. The Endless Enigma is great as well for those keyboard fans. It's just a very Hoedown as well. The Sheriff, such a great album. I think this one is actually becoming my favourite ELP album. But this is a fantastic one to get into after that, because that's, again, you're getting more into the progressive side of this group with this album, and it's fantastic. I highly rate that album. After that, I'd give you Tarkus, because that's got the 20-minute epic on it that starts the album, which has got so many different parts, so much to dissect, and it took me a long time to get into that particular piece, because every time I listened to this album the first time round, or like the first kind of few times I was getting into it, I would usually skip the title track because I wasn't used to longer music. But now I listen to it more than the other songs on the album. But this is a great one to get into afterwards because this has got all sorts of great stuff on it. It's got, you know, they've got the comedy music on here as well with Jeremy Bender, which is a fun one to just kind of sing along to as well. Not my favourite from the album, but still, it's just a fun song. The Only Way, in brackets him, is my favourite from this album. Absolutely fantastic piece. It's so great. The production on this is very good. Their producer was fantastic. I've forgotten his name now. I think it's Eddie Offord, I think that was his name, who did this. He also produced Close to the Edge as well. Fantastic producer. After that, then I'd probably give you Brain Salad Surgery. It's got the big chunky piece of Carnival 9, and then it's obviously got the stuff before then. It's got, you know, Still You Turn Me On. It's got Jerusalem, which is a cover version of like an old English song. I think it's definitely a cover. But yeah, you're getting into the real good parts of the LP now with the Brain Salad, with the Carnival 9 piece. It's fantastic. I really do recommend that. And then after that, I'd recommend listening to the live version, which is about 35 minutes long. So definitely take a listen to that one. And then I'd probably give you Works Volume 1. Because this is a double album. This is a long one. It's got so much stuff on the piano concerto. Fantastic. Once you've gotten into Carnival 9, you'll definitely like this album a lot more because Carnival 9 is very similar to the piano concerto, but just a bit less rocky. The piano concerto is more classical, but it's got like a similar structure, I guess. But it has got a lot of great stuff. Fanfare for the Common Man, which I think most people do know that. That's on this album, and it's fantastic. It's just a great album. And that's probably where I cut off for wanting to get into the group and all that kind of stuff. I'd probably after that put in Pictures and Exhibition, but that's a live album. So once you get the feel of the studio stuff and how the band kind of operates, then definitely check out their live stuff after that. Alright, so that is the end of today's video. Are you guys a fan of Emerson, Lake and Palmer? I assume you guys are because you watch my channel and you're all prog fans, I assume. But let me know your favourite album and let me know your story of how you got into the band, because I always like reading those kind of stories. They're always really nice to read. So yeah, see you guys on Wednesday for a review. So if you didn't catch my live stream very recently, my structure of videos is changing now. So every other week I will be doing a review, but on the Wednesdays that I'm not doing a review, I will be streaming at around 9 to 10 p.m. UK time. So if you're able to catch those, then definitely join us, because we did one last week and it was very, very fun. Great talking to you guys and answering your questions. So yeah, see you guys on Wednesday. Bye bye.